imagine you're a 14-year-old boy and your parents let you drive to do some Christmas shopping and you get carjacked by Santa Claus.
I mean, Merry Christmas, I guess.
Something.
I guess you were on the naughty list.
Apparently, yeah.
If you're deep down in the naughty list, Santa pulls out a gun on you.
That you've been really bad
real
that
bad
year. We're
this
past
year.
the point of cold and
Yeah.
stalking, okay? I'm gonna need the keys. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unbelievable, the podcast where I, future dead bank robber Kurt Danner, tell my friend, diseased French scientist Luis Mejia,
Hello.
2 unbelievable stories from history, the catch being one of them true, one of them false.
And it's up to me to figure out which is which.
Luis, we are going some excellent places today, some new locations, some old locations, but I promise you it will be stupid all the way. So
Yes.
I'm excited. I've got a lot of energy ready for this podcast. I'm ready to get into it. But before we get to all that fun stuff, Luis, can you give us a little true or false fact to start us off?
Of course, Kurt. I want to talk about Grover Cleveland today.
Okay.
You know, the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in U.S. history.
Right.
Now, true or false, Kurt? Grover Cleveland hated dentistry as a profession, and he believed that it shouldn't exist. Basically, that dentistry as a profession was just as, quote, useless as that mindfulness astrology. By the way, that quote was not real. That was me. But he was very much against astrology and mindfulness and all these, I guess at the time, science, what was considered medical science, you know, once it started transitioning from, you know, like from just religious stuff and there started being some like science-backed things. Dentistry was one of them. And Grover Cleveland was not into it.
Wow, I'm very torn because I feel like U.S. presidents have a weird relationship with teeth, you know? You never hear a normal fact involving a U.S. president's teeth. So I'm leaning towards it based on that, but I'm also like, what a weird hill to die on to be like, I'm anti-dentistry.
Anti-teeth.
You know what? Let's go with true. I want to believe in a more magical world where Grover Cleveland was ready to fight to the death with big dentist, big tooth.
Well, Kurt, that it's not true. I wanted to include Grover Cleveland, and I wanted to include something that just seemed normal, I guess. Actually, quick fun fact about Grover Cleveland. He, at one point, got a tumor in his mouth, and he wanted to get it removed, of course. However, he didn't want for him to get surgery and appear weak in front of the American people.
Well, don't have the surgery in front of the American people, obviously.
Well, here's what he did, Kurt. What he did is that he went in the middle of a lake and gathered a bunch of doctors to remove the tumor from inside his mouth, meaning that he had to have dentists and other professionals of the mouth in order to get this removed.
That is brilliant.
So maybe he did respect dentists somehow because they helped him out in this ordeal.
He respects dentists, but only in the privacy of his own boat.
He respects dentists, but only outside working hours.
Well, that's all right. You know, I had a feeling because Grover Cleveland's so topical that maybe you would just come up with some Grover Cleveland shenanigans. But like I said, I really wanted to believe in his beef with the dentistry industry. So that's all right. I was willing to take the risk. Let's move on to our 2 stories of the day. So this first story, Luis, you know, I feel a little bit personally connected to because, in short, this story is 2 men accidentally stumble upon a cave, decide to drop what they're doing to explore that cave, and meet a terrible fate for it. And I don't know about you, but that sounds eerily familiar to some situation we might get ourselves into.
That's true. Kurt and I, for those of you who don't know, have gotten ourselves into situations that could get us in trouble with the law, and somehow we're always one step ahead. What do you think, Kurt?
We love to get our hand stuck in a cookie jar, you know? I mean, that's just how it is on this podcast, okay?
Yep, that's true. And get caught with our hand in the cookie jar.
Exactly. Well, in this case, these 2 men were French ornithologists named Claude Archambault and Alain Tassel.
Ooh.
And in 1975, they were part of a research team that was studying birds in the Golestan Valley. This is a valley in northeastern Iran.
Okay.
Now, on June 23rd, Claude and Alain were out in the valley sometime around midday day, Claude tripped and fell into some bushes, and he discovered that these bushes were covering a small entrance to a cave. Now, even though this had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with their studies, the two men evidently decided to check out the cave a little bit.
Very nice.
And while in the cave, at some point, Claude was bitten on his head by a bat.
Oh.
Now, obviously bats can carry a lot of diseases, but there was one specific disease that Claude and Alain were worried about that led them to immediately abandon their study and go straight to the hospital.
Was it rabies?
It might be. Unfortunately for them, because they were out in the wilderness and they ultimately had to go to a hospital in the capital of Tehran, Claude wasn't able to receive treatment until several days later. When they finally arrived at the Malad hospital in Tehran, before even doing any testing, the doctors immediately gave Claude a shot. And Luis, it seems you might be ahead of the reveal here. This shot was in fact a rabies vaccine.
Yeah.
Because it was, in this case, worth giving a rabies vaccine before even finding out or taking the time to find out if he had rabies.
Right. What year is this, Kurt?
This is 1975.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, in case you don't know, Luis, rabies is absolutely terrifying, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, rabies is transmitted through saliva. This is why most modern cases of rabies come from an animal bite. Now, in some cases, the virus can lay dormant for years after infection before the symptoms start, but more often they start in only a few days. The first symptoms are fairly mild. It's just a headache and fever, things like this. But after a day or two, the rabies starts attacking the nervous system, and this causes brain inflammation, paralysis, anxiety, insomnia, confusion, paranoia, terror, and even hallucinations. In a day or two, the symptoms become even more severe. Rabies patients become aggressive and have violent muscle spasms. And most notably, patients develop the symptom of hydrophobia, which is fear of water. Now, if you've never seen this, it's pretty odd. Basically, the virus has rewired the brain to avoid water at all costs. In some cases, this means if a patient tries to raise a glass to their mouth to drink, their throat muscles will close and their body will have muscle spasms. But in other cases, people are literally kind of like afraid of water, and their aggression or other symptoms will flare up if they're in the presence of water.
It's like the aliens from Signs.
And then after this is death. This pretty much always results in death. The whole process usually takes less than 10 days. But before we move on, I just want to say that hydrophobia is a really interesting symptom because on one hand, it helps the virus weaken its host by basically like dehydrating them to death because you can't get more water. But on the other hand, it makes it impossible to swallow your own saliva. This is why rabid animals will sometimes be like foaming at the mouth. And if you remember, the disease is spread through saliva. So once you hit the hydrophobia stage, you're basically just like constantly leaking saliva out of your mouth. You're like a super spreader for the disease now, you know?
My God, this makes so much sense. I just imagine just the years of adaptation that the virus had in order to cause all of this to happen. It's like one of those moments where nature just is incredible at just how it survives in these situations and adapts to these very, very specific situations.
I know. Rabies is like a great example of how terrifying nature can be. And you know that like the virus isn't thinking, like, oh, this would be a good idea to do, but it has like adapted to be extremely self-sustaining.
Maybe not your viruses, Kurt, but my viruses talk to me every night.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Your virus is inside your head. Got it.
The viruses are just in there, just talking constantly. I think it's fun, but some other people call it tuberculosis. Don't trust it.
Okay. Interesting. So lastly, I was going to say that, in my opinion, the scariest part about rabies is that we don't have a cure for it. All we have is a temporary vaccine. So this means that if you haven't recently gotten a rabies vaccine and you get bitten by a rabid animal, if you start having symptoms before you can get to a hospital and get a vaccine, it's already too late for you. You're already going to die.
That's right.
And unfortunately, it seems this was the case for Claude Archambault. He died of rabies on July 1st, 1975. Now, because Claude was a foreign national, his death was reported on throughout Europe.
Classic.
And this story majorly piqued the interest of the scientific community, but not for reasons you would think, Luis.
Okay. It's because he was found with his clothes off when he died. It's because he was found with just his pants off, like Winnie the Pooh. It's because he was found with just pants and nothing up top, kind of like Bugs Bunny. No, Daffy Duck.
all good guesses, but unsurprisingly all wrong. Because I did say, Luis, not for the reasons you would think. So by definition, any reason you think of, it can't be.
Okay, Kurt. Well, there's a lot of things I don't think about. So, this is a vast playing ground.
That's true. And let's explore one of those things. Now, in order to do that, we got to go back to the year 134.
Ooh, good year.
We're in triple digit years here, baby. This is way back in time.
Yeah.
So in 134, this region of the Golestan Valley was the northeastern corner of the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire basically covered all of modern Iran, as well as a little bit of Afghanistan and Pakistan, but this section had only recently been absorbed by the empire. The region was inhabited by nomadic tribes that had been pushed out of the Eurasian steppes because of competition for territory with other tribes. During a previous unrelated war, the Parthian Empire had established several outposts and forts in this region, so now as kind of an accidental byproduct, they have control over it. The Parthian Empire allowed the tribes to inhabit the region as long as they paid a tribute or a tax to the regional satrap, basically the local governor. Now, for most of the year, the tribes would roam throughout the Alborz mountain range. The Alborz mountain range runs further than just along this valley, but the Golestan Valley is formed by some of the mountains in this mountain range kind of encircling it. The tribes would mostly sustain themselves by herding goats and sheep, so during the colder months when most of the mountain range was covered by snow, they would migrate down to the Golestan Valley so their flocks could have fields to graze on. And then while they were in the valley, the satrap's emissary would come and collect tribute from the tribes. Obviously, this works out because it's really the only time of year that the satrap knows where the tribes are going to be, but also the majority of the Parthian military's outposts were located in the valley. It's a lot harder to build forts in the middle of the mountains, you know?
Right.
So this arrangement worked out well for the Parthian Empire for a variety of reasons.
You know what we should have, Kurt? I think we should have like seasonal migrations again. And I think that's probably what makes us so sad these days. You know, the loneliness epidemic, whatever you want to call it. We're all just stuck in the same place constantly. I think we should move to the valley during winter and then go up to the mountains again during summer.
It does keep you busy, you know, when you're spending like a lot of your time just simply relocating, you know. That does eat up a lot of hours in the day.
I guess, you know, a lot of people are already doing this, but we tend to think of them now as boomers and retirees, right? A boomer family from Pennsylvania just takes a holiday to Palm Springs, to the Florida Keys. But it's not the same, Kurt.
You have to be like at one extreme end of the having possessions scale, you know? Have very few possessions and you're a nomadic tribe relocating.
Yeah.
Have many possessions and you're a rich person going to your summer home or winter home or whatever.
I want to make sure my goats graze, Kurt. I want them to graze.
I'm going to Key Largo so my goats can graze.
My goats need grazing. That's what I'm going to start saying. That's what I'm going to start saying whenever I say I'm in need of a trip somewhere. Just, God, my goats need grazing.
My goats need to graze, dude. Come on.
Winter is coming and my goats are hungry. Can't graze my goats. I was about to say, Jesus.
Well, so anyway, every year when it gets too cold up in the mountains, the nomadic tribes will come down to the valley. And so this whole arrangement works pretty well for a few years until the year 134. Now, in 134, the satrap's emissary arrived to collect the seasonal taxes. When the emissary met the first tribe and arrived in their encampment, he found it in a state of disarray and chaos. So the encampment was in shambles. About a third of the population was either laying on the ground, basically in a comatose state, or wandering around deliriously.
Oh, God.
Some of them even attacked the emissary and his escort, basically the guards he had with him, had to beat them back with clubs and spears.
Oh, God.
Now, the emissary spoke with the tribal elders, but unfortunately this didn't tell him much. So, the official language of the Parthian Empire was actually Greek. Most of the subjects of the empire also spoke Aramaic because it was kind of like the commonly spoken second language throughout all the different regions the empire covered.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, odds are the tribal elders didn't speak much of either Greek or Aramaic. Rather, they probably spoke their own language, Mazandarani, or a similar dialect, because the nomadic tribes tended to either speak that or a dialect closely related to it. But basically, all of these are like Proto-Iranian languages.
Sure.
Now, usually this language barrier didn't matter because the exchange would just be like, "Hi, I'm here for the taxes. Hi, here are the taxes." But obviously, explaining whatever's going on here is going to require a much more complex conversation.
Yeah. How do you explain your half dead village?
Right. So the only takeaway from this for the emissary is that the tribe doesn't have any tribute to give them, and also they say they have been cursed by a deity known as Angra Mainyu. Now, this is almost certainly the Parthian interpretation of whatever the village elders said, because Angra Mainyu is an evil spirit in Zoroastrianism, which was the religion of the Parthian Empire. But the nomadic tribes had their own completely different religion, so there's basically like no chance that they would have said this. They probably wouldn't have even known who Angra Mainyu was.
Right, yeah.
Either way, the emissary reports this encounter back to the satrap, who is presumably not very happy about not getting any tribute. And even worse, some of the members of the emissary's escort fall ill and eventually become violently delirious. They end up having to be bound with ropes so they don't attack anyone. Now, at this point, it seems that the satrap realized that they were dealing with some sort of sickness. They don't know a lot here, but they can at least conclude, okay, you were in contact with these people who are acting strange. Now you're acting strange in the same way. This must be some sort of outbreak here.
Sure.
Honestly, this is lucky timing for the Parthian Empire, because I feel like if it was a couple hundred years before this, they would have almost certainly been blaming like religion or evil spirits or something like that.
Well, I guess so. Let's get let's get to the bottom of this. Never hurt anyone.
That's true. So they are, it seems aware that there's some sort of outbreak here. But like I said, that was basically the extent of their medical knowledge. Spoiler alert, Luis, the Parthian Empire did not particularly care about some random nomadic tribes that pay them taxes once a year. So they're not going to end up doing anything to try to cure them here.
Sure, yeah.
Sadly, we don't have any humors or strange medical treatments incoming. So I want to just pause here and say, Luis, what strange medical treatment do you wish they'd attempted?
Forcibly funnel of water down the throat.
Oh, okay.
If they're not going to drink water, we're going to force them to drink water. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe all you need is water to fix your rabies.
I think your head's in the right place, because, I was going to say, while I was doing research, I found some other, in other times and cultures, ancient treatments that people had attempted for rabies. Mm-hmm. One of them, to deal with the hydrophobia, was like, just throw the person in a lake. Just submerge them in water. They'll have to drink it.
No, I like that. That's like full immersion therapy. Full, like, actually just throw them in the lake and have them figure out by themselves.
But I also wanted to say that I found one ancient treatment for rabies that was to grill the liver of a rabid dog and then eat it. And this made me laugh really hard because I couldn't stop thinking liver of the dog that bit you.
Ooh, yeah. Kurt, you're so smart, honestly. Like, that's really nice.
That is really nice, isn't it?
That's really, really good. Yeah, just the liver of the dog that bit you, and that dog has rabies.
Right.
So basically, if you got bit by a rabid dog, just kill it and eat its liver. Then you should be fine.
Right. I mean, they didn't specify that it has to be the same dog, but I would assume, the dog's already there. Like, it just bit you.
That's right. No, that's what I mean.
You may as well, right?
Yeah, you've got the dog right there. Just, hey man, can I get your liver really quick? Don't be a dick.
It's the least you could do at this point, frankly.
Yeah, come on.
But anyway, I just thought that was nice. But so the Parthians are not going to do any curing here. And one thing that it seems like they decided in the beginning was that if one of the tribes has this problem, the other tribes must all have it as well. Because the first thing they did was mobilize all their soldiers in the area to round up all the tribes and relocate them into one single encampment.
Uh-oh.
They also instructed soldiers not to let any of the people touch them. Seems like they believe that's how the illness is spreading. So there's 5 different tribes in total here. And by the way, Luis, they don't all particularly like each other. Mm-hmm. Not to mention that one of these tribes is turning into zombies or whatever they have going on over there,
And usually, cohabitation and having roommates it comes with its own set of issues.
It does.
Take it from us. I gave Kurt rabies.
Then I had to eat your liver.
That's right.
It was a whole thing. Well, so the Parthian Empire relocates the 5 tribes into one encampment and surrounds them. They also slaughter all of their herds and burn them, so now the tribes have basically no food source. They set up a perimeter around the encampment and kill anyone who tries to leave or gets too close to the soldiers. And we don't know many details about what happens in the next week or so, but we can presume people were overcrowded into one small area with basically no food. So between starvation, infighting, being killed if you tried to leave, and the disease now running rampant through the camp, people were probably dying at a pretty staggering rate.
Yeah, probably.
At some point, the majority of the people had died, and most of the remaining survivors belonged to one specific tribe called the Saka. Now, interestingly, from officials' accounts at the times, they no longer see anyone acting aggressive or strange. It seems like people are just kind of slowly starving now. Because there are still some food sources, such as grass, insects, or whatever small animals they can trap, the remaining people of the Saka tribe are starving at a very slow rate. And completely separate from this, around this time, the Parthian Empire began getting into more and more conflicts on their western border with a different empire known as the Roman Empire.
Ah, yes. Cameo.
And this was not going super well for the Parthian Empire. They'd even lost some major cities in here. So the king of the Parthian Empire, King Pacorus II, relocated as many soldiers as possible to the western border to give reinforcements. Meanwhile, in the northeast corner of the empire, it's taking quite a lot of soldiers to watch the Saka slowly starve to death. So it seems like they say, okay, let's just accelerate this process a little bit. They burn the encampment down with the Saka still in it and then bury everything in a mass grave.
Oh my God. This is nice. This is nice. Hey, just don't worry about it. Just, it's gone. Hey, your people are starving? Boom. No more people. No more starving. Easy.
These are the kind of rash decisions people make when the Roman Empire is knocking on your door, you know.
That's right.
You can't play around with the Roman Empire.
Not at all, because they'll do it for you. They'll do
That's
that.
true.
So here's your choice on whether or not you want to do it yourself with your own hand.
Now, fast forward to 1963. This mass grave was found and excavated. It was named the Golistan Valley Site. Obviously, most of the artifacts were either destroyed by the fire or by being buried for so long. But of the things they found, Luis, hundreds of artifacts made of stone or clay had 2 words inscribed into them. These words were Gar Draga.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind that the majority of people living in the tribe probably didn't know how to read or write. So if the same 2 words have been carved into hundreds of items, theoretically it must be something pretty significant. Draga was never translated, probably because it's either a name or a word adopted from another language that was only used by early nomadic tribes. But the first word, Ga, means cave.
Oh.
Now, is it possible that this is a warning about the origin of the outbreak?
Ooh.
This is the theory here. Now, odds are, it wasn't the same cave that Claude wandered into. It certainly wasn't the same bat, I'll tell you that. But this shows that it's clearly possible for there to be caves with rabid bats in this area. So it's very possible that this outbreak amongst the tribe was rabies. It also seems likely that them writing Ga Draga on everything meant that they at least knew where the sickness had come from and maybe were trying to warn others in the future. Now, if you choose to believe in a more magical world, you can say it was the same cave that Claude wandered into and got bitten by a bat, because it is possible.
Right.
It just, is unlikely. There's probably a lot of caves in the valley. But more magical world believers, stay with us, because we're going to layer deeper, okay?
Okay. We're still going?
We're going to a theory built on a theory. Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Now, here's the thing. If the nomadic tribes had rabies, if this is what the outbreak was, why were the Saka still alive after the others had died? Now, there's lots of easy explanations for this, ranging from they managed to avoid being infected to the record keeping was inaccurate and they actually were all sick. But some scientists wondered if it was possible that they could have had a genetic immunity or even a partial immunity to the rabies somehow. Maybe, Luis, the Golistan Valley massacre was just one big accidental social experiment.
Whoa. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Now, this is not the kind of thing that you can test 2,000-year-old dead bodies for, but luckily there were many other tribes closely related to the Saka. They had all kind of descended from the same groups, and many of the descendants of these other tribes still lived in villages in the Alborz Mountains. So in 2007, scientists took blood samples from various descendants of these tribes, and what they found was 7% of them had slight rabies antibodies, almost as if they had been given a rabies vaccination. But here's the thing, none of these people were ever vaccinated.
Oh, plot twist.
This raises the question, could they survive rabies? Obviously, there's no ethical way to test that, but also according to my research, it seems like people think it probably wouldn't be enough of an antibody presence for them to survive. Maybe more likely that they would have less severe symptoms.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't really understand the science on this, but it's not earth-shattering oh, we found the rabies immunity, but it is interesting evidence of something that might have been going on a long time ago.
Oh my God. And it all goes around rabies.
And it's all about rabies.
All about foaming at the mouth.
Luis, you are always our more magical world believer. Tell me, how are you feeling about these theories? First of all, are you thinking that the 2 words inscribed on everything was a warning, stay away from the caves? And if you're buying into that, what's your thoughts on the ancient rabies immunity?
I don't think they're trying to keep you away from the caves, but I think they were just being silly. I think they wrote it down thinking, oh, this is going to stump archaeologists in the future. Hell yeah.
This is our one revenge. We'll be indecipherable to the future.
That's right. Though I do really believe in a rabies cure. I think it could have been developed, or, I don't know. If they lost an entire town, they had good incentives to make something that would work, right? Or else your entire town would be dying more and more. I don't know. Those are my thoughts, Kurt. But I choose to believe. I don't know about everyone else. I choose to believe. I choose to believe in rabies. Sorry. There. I said it.
Just to be clear, the theory isn't that they figured out some cure way back when. It's that for some reason there was a genetic line of people that had some amount of immunity to rabies, maybe. We'll never know now probably unless they come up with better DNA testing. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. And to think that maybe we could have continued that into our population if it hadn't been for the Parthian Empire.
If it hadn't been for the goddamn Parthians. That's something that was troubling the Romans. Just if it hadn't been for the Parthians, we'd be in a better spot right now.
That's what the Romans were trying to stop. They were like, we got to get in here, put a stop to this.
Oh, good. That's right. It's like, oh, I got a terrible gift this Christmas. What was it? The Parthians. They're useless.
So, Luis, to start off the second story, let me ask you a question. If you were going to rob a bank in disguise, what would you wear? And while you're thinking about that, let me give you my answer, okay? I would dress up like a mime, and then when they open the bank vault, I'd act like there's still an invisible wall so I can't get in, and then I'd start executing hostages. Because I just think that would be like a fun bit to throw into a high-stakes situation.
It's like, oh God, it's a mime. It's actually kind of funny. We don't want to ruin the show. No, Kurt, I would actually go in fully naked, just straight up in the nude, rob the bank, and then all the cameras just have me as a naked person, and I can make my quick getaway by simply putting on clothes. They'll never expect the naked heister to have clothes on.
Oh, wow. I don't know if that's really stupid or really genius, but that's right in the gray area where this story takes place. So let's get rocking.
Hell yeah.
Now, as you might have guessed, this is going to be a story about a bank robbery. Evidently one of our favorite topics because we seem to keep going back to it.
It's good. It's always good.
It's always good. Now, in the 1920s, the state of Texas saw a huge spike in bank robberies. It's difficult to find any concrete numbers on this, but basically it seems like things went from being pretty quiet to an average of 3 to 4 banks in Texas being robbed every single day.
And that's the average, right? So maybe there was a day when 8 banks were robbed.
Yeah, you could have a 10 bank robbery day in Texas in the 20s. I'm not really sure why this happened. One of my theories is that like maybe in the 20s there's more banks, more guns, more getaway cars, so like all the pieces are kind of there. Maybe people just like woke up to it. Like people started robbing banks and everyone else is like, wow, that looks really easy to get away with. Let me try that.
And turns out they were right.
Turns out they were absolutely right. But one thing about Texas, you can always count on them to do the most unhinged thing in the name of law and order. So in 1927, the Texas Bankers Association offered a $5,000 reward for any dead bank robber. This would be about $85,000 in modern money.
Any dead one.
And hilariously, they specify that they won't pay, quote, a single cent for a live bank robber. They only want dead bank robbers.
Maybe they're losing an opportunity. You know how the FBI or the CIA hires hackers that probably did wrong? You know, maybe you can learn tips from a bank robber. Okay, here's the thing. If you spare a bank robber's life and tell him we want to work with you to tell us what to do with our banks in order to make them safer from bank robberies, do you think he would give false advice to make it easier for him to rob a bank or actually help out the feds? Just food for thought.
I think if the other side of it is like there's a $5,000 reward for your death, probably they're going to be compelled to do whatever, because this kind of makes it where like every single person is going to try to shoot the bank robber.
Right.
Because $85,000 in modern money, it's a lot of money for just like a random dead guy.
I want to take my chances, right?
Yeah.
Go up to my close cousin and I say, hey man, I am so sorry, but I have to pay rent. I know you robbed a bank 3 years ago and you're reformed, but I am so sorry.
You know, you're saying these things joking around, but you're kind of leading yourself into some of the schemes that this resulted in.
Oh, okay.
This whole like blank bounty thing had a lot of interesting outcomes.
Okay.
First of all, in some cases where bank robbers stole less than $5,000, one of the robbers would ultimately turn on the other ones in an attempt to at least get more than $5,000 out of the heist. So they'd literally be like, we didn't steal enough. I'm going to kill my partners and turn them in for the reward.
Oh, that's awesome. and then kill themselves in front of the feds. Here's another one, boys.
Keep the tab running. There's also plenty of cases of both law enforcement and private citizens setting people up to rob a bank, or even to just appear to be robbing a bank and then killing them and collecting the reward.
Oh, that's nuts.
Obviously, lots of completely innocent people were mistaken as potential bank robbers and killed. But perhaps most of all, Luis, it made robbing a bank in Texas much more dangerous, because now every single person you see is probably going to try to kill you.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's going to be a shootout, yes or yes, right?
Right. Yeah. Yes or yes. Now, despite all these mishaps, this bounty existed in Texas until the 60s.
Wow.
That's way past where our story takes place, but I just wanted to tell you that out of interest, that like all the way until the 60s, this thing was going on in Texas.
That's amazing. I should have been born in Texas in the 60s. That's all I'm saying. Should have been alive then.
It's a real tricky one because you're like, get born in Texas during this time period, you can get rich off killing bank robbers. But apparently, get born in Texas before this time period, you can get rich off bank robbing. So,
listen,
I don't know, it's a real duality of man type of deal.
But here's the thing. If I'm born in Texas, like mid 1800s, you said?
So 1927 is when they start the blank $5,000 bounty. So before that, they're on the 3 to 4 banks a day average.
Then easy, Kurt. I choose to be born in early 1800s Texas so that I can do two things. I can A, be born in Mexico, live as a Mexican for half my life, then half the state become the U.S., and then in order to cope with not being Mexican anymore, I can rob banks and die happily knowing that I can give a good inheritance to my children because as I'm an old man, I will have a bounty on my head. I just show up in front of my grandchildren and off myself in front of them, changing the trajectory of their lives, not just emotionally, but also financially. Ever thought about that?
Man, that's making me think that there's like a weird life insurance policy scheme in there where you're like, I've got a terminal illness. I'm 80 years old. I want to leave money to my family, so I'm going to go rob a bank and have them shoot me and get the money. It just, you open up so many weird opportunities with this blank check
Kurt,
for dead bank robbers thing, I'm telling you.
I know the story really hasn't started. You're just providing context right now. But I am already thinking of like 500 different outcomes that I could play around with this and things that could come up in this story.
And I've got great news for you, Luis, because we've got more weird stuff to get to. So let's keep on rolling, because this is the point where we finally get to meet our main character, a man named Marshall Ratliff. And we don't know much background about Marshall in 1927, except that he was already a lifelong criminal, which, by the way, was not very long because he was only 24 years old at the time. Marshall and his brother were both serving out 18-year prison sentences for robbing a bank, but for some unknown reason, only 2 years into their sentence, the governor granted them both pardons. And so, Luis, guess what they do now?
They kill each other.
No, you once famously said when I get a pass for having done a bad thing, what I'm gonna immediately do is that thing again, but more.
Oh no, of course. It's the classic shoplifting method, right? All right, everyone who doesn't want to learn tips about how to shoplift, listen away now. And also, if you're any position of authority, this is not me giving advice for shoplifting. It's just me telling a story. And the title of it is How to Not Shoplift. Wink, wink. Okay. So you have to, first of all, do an initial shoplift. Doesn't matter. Just look normal. Just look casual. Grab the thing. Go. Can't really chase you. But here's the problem. Most people will get comfortable seeing how easy it is indeed to shoplift. So they get carried away and they get stuck in the same place. So here's what you don't do. Wink, wink. After you don't shoplift, you go to a different store. It can be of the same chain, but you go to a different store, ideally in a different zip code, and then go there, and then just switch out stores. And then that's how you can steal forever. Anyway, what were we talking about?
You know, Luis, you're lucky there's not still this $5,000 bounty, because that money would look real nice in my pocket, and I know where you live.
I am not robbing a bank. I am simply
shoplifting a bank.
I'm just making Target lose like $20 every month. Like, come on.
Well, I guess it's not exactly the same. Maybe they'll give me like $1,000 for that. They got to give me something. Come on.
$20 and a cigarette is the bounty you'll get for me. and maybe they are out of cigarettes.
But anyway, what we've established here is that if you get away with your crime, the absolute thing to do is that same crime again, which is exactly what Marshall and his brother start planning on. So they start planning to rob a bank in a town called Cisco, Texas. Marshall had lived in Cisco until he was finally caught by law enforcement, so he was very familiar with the town and the bank. Marshall's brother managed to get arrested again almost immediately. So instead, Marshall enlisted the help of some men he knew who were also big into the whole crime stuff.
Nice.
2 men named Henry Helms and Robert Hill, and also a third unnamed man who was a safecracker. And boy, oh boy, Luis, to live in a time period when safecracker is a viable profession. What's your career? Oh, I just open up safes. I get into safes.
Kurt, you laugh, but there are in Mexico, we have literal keymen, right, whose main job is making you keys or like an extra pair of keys. But however, how they make most of their money is by breaking open locks, right? By being locksmiths and
Man, they got it going on in Mexico, dude.
Listen,
greatest country on earth.
That's what I keep saying. But imagine meeting these people, Kurt, and you're like, oh, have you met my two friends? Yes, they're very involved in crime.
They're big into crime.
Big into crime.
With a specialization in safe cracking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I went to crime school and I minored in safe cracking.
Cut my teeth in the safe cracking industry.
My father, like his father before him, come from a long line of safe crackers.
Well, the reason why we don't know the name of this third man is because he caught the flu before the heist, so the group replaced him with a relative of Henry Helms named Louis Davis. Now, not only would this be Louis Davis's first heist, but to our knowledge, Luis, it would be his first crime ever.
Aww.
This is his criminal debut.
Cute.
Louis Davis was not a lifelong criminal like the other men, but apparently he was desperate for money to provide for his family and was promised a big payday.
That's nice. It's like almost an inspiring story. Please let it be an inspiring story.
Yeah, he's their Make-A-Wish kid.
Make-A-Wish criminal. Make-A-Wish. I want to rob a bank.
And then they're going to get the $5,000 bounty out of him at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's they don't even have to pull the trigger.
So a quick recap of the group. We have Marshall Ratliff, who again is familiar with Cisco, then Robert Hill, Henry Helms, and finally making his crime debut, Louis Davis.
Louis Davis.
Now, in the fall of 1927 is when the Texas Bankers Association began offering the $5,000 bounty on dead bank robbers, and this heist happened December 23rd, 1927. So, possibly unbeknownst to the men, they're one of the first Texas bank robberies to be done on expert mode.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, on New Game Plus, if you will.
Now, before we get to the heist, one last problem to take care of. So, as I said, Marshall Ratliff had lived in Cisco, and he knew that people would recognize him, so he decided to wear a disguise.
Nice.
Now, given the time of year, Marshall Ratliff decided it would be a good idea to disguise himself by dressing up as Santa Claus.
Okay, nice.
So on December 23rd, Marshall Ratliff walked down the main avenue of Cisco dressed as Santa Claus. As he headed towards the bank, excited children ran up to him asking Christmas-related questions, and Marshall acted friendly, but finally got the group of children to disperse before he entered the bank. Marshall entered the bank and saw 2 bank employees, 2 customers, and 2 fourth-grade girls inside. Then behind him, a woman named Miss Blassingame entered, led by her 6-year-old daughter who wanted to see Santa. And then, at this moment, the other 3 robbers pulled up in a car that the men had stolen earlier. They entered the bank, drew their pistols, and shouted, "Hands up!" And by the way, Luis, keep in mind that Marshall is the only one wearing a costume here, so this robbery is being carried out by Santa Claus and 3 bank robbers.
You know, thank God it was near Christmas, right? Imagine if you realize as a bank robber that your only disguise is a Santa Claus suit, but it's, June.
Maybe it was just really lucky timing. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, maybe it's like, oh shoot, guys, I only have my Santa Claus outfit. Or like, it's okay. Then we'll just have it 2 days before Christmas. It all worked out.
Perfect. The perfect crime.
The perfect
They'll never
crime.
suspect it. So Marshall pulled out a sack that he had hidden underneath his costume and began filling it with money from the bank's safe and vault while the other men watched the hostages, which, by the way, what a great costume detail that Santa Claus is going to be the one carrying the bag of money.
Please, oh please tell me he grabbed a Sharpie and just drew like a big $sign on it.
The big $sign, man. Speaking of the more magical world believers, I'm believing there was a $sign on that bag. I need to.
Yeah.
Now, during the chaos of this, Miss Blassingame and her daughter managed to escape through a side door into an alleyway. Miss Blassingame then ran to the police station about a block away, shouting, "They're robbing the bank!"
They be robbing the bank.
They're robbing that bank. Come on now. As you might guess, Luis, this drew quickly a mixed crowd of law enforcement and citizens who surrounded the bank. They blocked the front door, and the only other way to exit the bank was through the side door into the alley. This is also where the robbers had parked their getaway car. So, officers and citizens set up at either end of the alley waiting for the robbers to exit. Now, needless to say, everyone has at least one gun with them. And I say at least one because there's some accounts of people in the crowd being like, "Oh man, I can't believe I forgot my gun today." And then someone else is like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I got an extra one you can use."
You can use mine. Yeah. That's probably the most Texas thing ever. Texas, early 1900s. No rule of law.
Oh, yeah. So, the robbers, while they're still in the bank, realize that they've been surrounded. Now, Luis, what would you do in this situation? Any ideas?
Okay, so they blocked off the alley, right, where my getaway car is.
They blocked off the front door, and they're, like, set up on either side of the alley. So they're, like, everyone's aiming their guns at the door to the alleyway where the getaway car is.
Well, clearly, I would take off the Santa Claus costume, and act like I was never there.
Wrong answer. Never take off the Santa Claus costume.
Oh,
Well, this is what the robbers do, Luis. After finding 2 more bank employees in the back office, they gather together their 8 hostages and use them as human shields to leave the bank.
jeez.
And by the way, this includes the 2 4th grade girls.
Oh, classic. Good.
So the bandits exited the bank into the alleyway. Now, despite their wall of hostages, the crowd opened fire on them anyway.
My gosh. One bullet will get through.
The robbers returned fire as they tried to get to their car, and this resulted in some darkly hilarious moments, such as Marshall Ratliff dressed as Santa using a 4th grade girl for cover while he exchanges fire with the police.
That image is great, actually. It's like, I imagine Captain America, but instead of a shield, it's a 4th grader.
This story is just full of surreal mental images that have the most Texas theme to them.
Bag of money on one hand, 4th grader in the other, bullets flying all around, Santa Claus strapped.
So in this shootout, 2 officers were fatally wounded, 6 people in the crowd and several hostages were wounded. Marshall Ratliff and Robert Hill were both struck by bullets, and Louis Davis was severely injured.
No.
All in all, the bank was struck by an estimated 200 bullets, so this was a massive shootout.
Yeah, damn.
Now, the robbers managed to get to their car and drive off with the 2 4th grade girls. The police and mob of citizens followed them, and so in an attempt to pop their tires, the robbers threw nails out of the car behind them.
Amazing.
And evidently, Luis, this worked somewhat because the robbers were able to briefly lose them.
Wow. This is very Looney Tunes, and I'm loving it.
It's very Looney Tunes. And building on this Looney Tunes theme, the robbers quickly realized that their car was running out of gas, either because they had forgotten to fill it up or because the gas tank had gotten shot in the gunfire.
Yeah.
Either way, love it. So, near the edge of town, the robbers decided to switch to a different car. They managed to stop a car at gunpoint driven by a 14-year-old boy named Woodrow Wilson Harris. No relation. And Woodrow's parents and grandmother were also in the car. They had let him take the car to drive them into town to do some last-minute Christmas shopping, which, imagine you're a 14-year-old boy and your parents let you drive to do some Christmas shopping and you get carjacked by Santa Claus.
I mean, Merry Christmas, I guess.
Something.
I guess you were on the naughty list.
Apparently, yeah.
if you're deep down in the naughty list, Santa pulls out a gun on you.
That you've been really
You've been
bad
real
that
bad
year. We're
this
past
year.
the point of coal and the
Yeah.
stalking, okay? I'm gonna need the keys.
We're now stealing your vehicle and pointing a gun at your head.
So Woodrow Wilson and his family leave their car. The robbers transferred the badly injured Louis Davis, the 2 4th grade girls, and their stolen money to the new car. And speaking of money, let's pause for a moment here to talk about how much they got.
Oh, please. Let it be a comically small amount.
No, it's a large amount.
Oh,
They
okay.
stole in total $162,400 in cash and bonds,
Oh, man.
which would be around $3 million today.
Oh, God.
And at this point in time, this would have been the most ever stolen from a Texas bank, despite their 3 to 4 banks a day numbers.
Huh. Interesting. You know, I said that before because I really wanted this to be all this work for like $50, you know?
Oh, don't worry about it, Luis. It's worse than that.
Oh.
It's so much worse
Okay,
than that.
let's hear it.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So the robbers have their new car, but when they try to leave, they realize the clever and scheming 14-year-old Woodrow Wilson Harris had taken the keys with them, so they can't start the car.
Nice. Hell yeah.
So instead, they go back to their first car. At this point, Louis Davis had lost consciousness, so they left him in Woodrow Wilson's car. And also, somehow in all this, they managed to leave the bag of money in Woodrow Wilson's car.
Incredible.
So now, Marshall Ratliff, Robert Hill, Henry Helms, and the 2 4th grade girls leave in the original getaway car empty-handed.
Thank God. God, this is good.
This is perfect. I mean, all the pieces are coming together.
4th graders are just happy that they're not going to school this day.
They drive the car off-road through brush and trees until it gets too thick to continue. And a quick side note, during this drive, at some point, Marshall Ratliff lifted his mask a little bit to examine a wound on his chin, and one of the 4th graders immediately recognized him.
Nice. Hell yeah. Kill the 4th graders, I guess.
Well, I don't think he realized that she had recognized him, but, you know, at this point now, the whole Santa costume was for nothing. So they're driving through brush. Once it became too thick, the robbers abandoned the car and took the 2 children with them to continue on foot. At this point, there were several hundred people searching for them, so the robbers hid in the wilderness until nightfall. Then Henry and Robert snuck back into Cisco and stole another car. The rest of that night and the following day, the robbers tried to find a way out of the area, but because they were avoiding any main roads or roads that might have other cars on them. They're kind of just like meandering around. They're not really able to get very far. And they also spend most of the daylight hours hiding since there's still tons of people searching for them.
Yeah.
Now, the next day, which by the way was Christmas Day, the robbers wrecked their car. So Henry Helms walked to a nearby farm and told the farmer that he and his wife had been in a car accident and he needed to drive her to the hospital. The farmer told his son, who was a teenager named Carl Wiley, to drive Henry. But then when they were leaving, apparently the farmer realizes this guy is probably one of the bandits, so he tries to shoot Henry, but he misses and instead hits his son Carl in the arm.
Oh no. Carl, I guess you have to rob a bank now before you die.
That's true. Quick, get him to a bank. It can't be for nothing. So, since Henry has a gun, he's still able to convince Carl to drive him away. They drive to pick up Robert and Marshall, but apparently the bank robbers still think it's too dangerous to leave the area because instead of having Carl drive them away, they just camp out in a field for the rest of the night and the next day. Now, to be fair, maybe they weren't in the best states of mind at this point. Carl would later tell authorities that the robbers seemed tired and weak from their injuries and lack of food and water. All they had to eat were a couple oranges. And also, despite the cold temperatures, they refused to build a fire for fear of being seen. So it's a pretty rough life for them right now.
The life of a criminal is not sad, Kurt. It's kind of sad, Kurt, is what I mean. It's not easy. You know, having to meander from a target to another target. You don't make bonds.
And it's all for no money at this point. They've lost their loot, honestly. This is high time for one of them to betray the others and get that $5,000 bounty.
That's right. I saw Mommy getting shot by Santa Claus.
I saw Mommy robbing a bank with Santa Claus, and I'm packing. Finally, on the evening of December 26th, the robbers have Carl drive them, but because they're still avoiding any other cars, they actually end up going backwards and basically return to Cisco. Now that they're in Cisco, they decide to steal another car, and this is a minor detail, but just like such a classic moment. So, because Marshall Ratliff had been shot in the leg, he stayed in the car with Carl Wiley, while Robert and Henry went to steal another car. At one point, Robert and Henry returned with a towel they had found and asked Marshall how to force down the window on a large car that they want to steal. And so Marshall explains to them how to do it and they leave again. But then a little while later, they returned with a significantly smaller car they had stolen. You can picture like a 1920s car with only the front seat. So it seems like they just gave up on the big car they wanted. So the robbers squeeze themselves into their new stolen car. They tell Carl because they like him, he's free to go, and they drive off. Now, Carl obviously goes straight to the police. Then a few hours later, in a nearby town called South Bend, a police officer spotted the robbers in their car. They were drawing a lot of attention, to be fair, because one of their wheels was missing. The robbers spotted the officer spotting them and drove off, but the police followed them in two cars. The robbers and police exchanged gunfire as they chased them down the highway, and after about a mile, the robbers turned onto a road leading to an oil field, and the chase continued for another mile through the oil field. And before we move on from this, Luis, let's just enjoy this scene for a moment, because we've got three bank robbers, one of them presumably still dressed as Santa Claus, squeezed into their 1920s clown car, running from the police through an oil field.
It's good. I mean, I'm at a loss of words.
It's so magical.
If you're in an oil field, it might be dangerous, right? I don't know. Light a match, throw it out, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're not meant to drive through an oil field, but keep in mind, they're literally having a gunfight like on the highway with police. Like, there's a lot of risks involved in a life of crime in Texas in the 1920s.
Right, yeah, that's right.
So about a mile into the oil field, they jump out of the car and take off on foot. Now, seeing this, one of the officers chasing them named Cy Bradford jumped out of the police car, and Cy Bradford was apparently famous in Texas for being one of the most decorated police officers, so he's probably like the OG Texas sheriff guy, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like one of those dirty, hairy types.
Yes, exactly, but with, Texas flavor. So Cy Bradford jumps out of the car, armed with his double-barrel shotgun, and as the robbers are running, he shoots all three of the men in only 3 shots, so like 1 shot for each. Now, at this point, Marshall Ratliff was too wounded to continue running, and he was arrested. Police reported that Marshall had at least 6 gunshot wounds, was carrying 5 pistols, a shotgun, and 3 belts of ammo. So the guy's really a walking arsenal here.
Yeah, really.
Now, despite being shot, Robert and Henry were still able to get up and escape into some nearby woods, but at this point, since they were badly wounded, it was really only a matter of time before they either died or were caught. Also, Texas after this threw absolutely everything into the search for them, including using planes, which, just to remind you, this is 1927, and we're using planes for a manhunt.
That's something I wanted to bring up, too. Like, it's 1927, and you're saying there was a wild chase, right? A police chase in police cars. These cars could not have been going real fast, right? Like,
yeah, a wild 30-mile-per-hour police chase.
That's right. Yeah, like, Come on. Let's be honest. You'd probably be better off running.
So Texas is, going after them with everything they got. Robert and Henry are wounded and tired, and finally a few days later, when they were caught by police, they surrendered without a fight. Robert Hill was given a life sentence. He probably would have gotten the death penalty, but his lawyers managed to argue that Robert had only ever returned fire in all the exchanges, so basically saying, like, he never shot first.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Self-defense. Awesome.
Yeah, and, interestingly, because there was this open bounty on bank robbers, Robert said that he believed people were primarily trying to kill him rather than arrest him. So, in a way, it was sort of self-defense. Robert was also the only one to plead guilty to his crimes and take the stand to testify on his own behalf. In his testimony, he talked about being an orphan and being raised in a state facility. And since he was only 21 at the time, maybe this made the jury see him as a kid who kind of got caught up in a life of crime, but regretted his actions. He also promised to be a model prisoner and said he had found religion and wanted to be baptized.
Nice.
Now, in contrast to this reformed image, Robert managed to escape prison 3 separate times during his incarceration.
Amazing.
At one point, even being on the run for several weeks before they caught him again.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, he was being the model prisoner, because what do you think about prisoners is when they get out, when they escape? He never specified what model prisoner he was.
It's just a stress test of the prison system, He's just trying to plug the leaks here.
That's right.
The only way he knows how.
Yeah, he's avoiding other people from running away by doing it himself.
Robert was released on parole finally in the 1940s, and after being released, it seems he never returned to his life of crime, or at least not that we know of. Maybe he just got smart enough not to get caught again.
Yeah, not publicly. He started moving to a different target.
But that's pretty much the end of the story for him. Now, unfortunately for Henry Helms, he had neither sob story nor plausible deniability, because the court had specific evidence that Henry had shot and killed 2 police officers during the robbery. He was sentenced to death and pretended to have gone insane to appeal his case, but the court didn't believe him, and so he was executed.
Ah. Womp womp.
And then finally we get to Marshall Ratliff's legal proceedings. First, he was sentenced to life in prison for armed robbery, but later in another court case, he was sentenced to death for killing a police officer during the robbery. Marshall pretended to have gone insane and appealed his death sentence, and amazingly, Luis, this time it kind of worked because the prison guards moved him to a county jail with much less security where he could be observed.
Nice.
So, for 10 days, Marshall pretended to be paralyzed, blind, and delirious. Then, one night, Marshall was left unattended. He left his bed and snuck into the deputy sheriff's office and found a pistol. He then found the deputy and shot him several times, then fought with another officer before the officer managed to subdue Marshall by beating him with the empty pistol.
Whoa. Oh my God.
Now, the following day, it became clear that the deputy who had been shot wasn't going to be able to recover from his wounds. And not only was the deputy an older man who was known to be kind and friendly to everyone, but also at this point, it had been 2 years since the original robbery, so tension's pretty high. An angry mob of 200 people formed outside the jail and decided they were tired of waiting. They were just going to execute Marshall themselves. So the mob forced their way past the prison guards to get Marshall from his cell. They stripped his clothes off and brought him outside to be hung from a telephone pole. They put a noose around his neck and lifted him up, but the rope broke.
Oh my God.
So they sent someone to get a stronger rope. When this person returned, they hoisted him up again with a stronger rope, but someone in the crowd mentioned that Marshall might have last words he wanted to say, so they lowered him back down. Marshall briefly apologized, then they hoisted him up again, and finally, 2 years after robbing a bank dressed as Santa Claus, Marshall Ratliff was executed.
Can you imagine they bring you down from being hanged and you're like, okay, now I have to give the best speech of my life, because if they want to hear my last words, I have to move them.
I know.
You know? Convince them.
You got to think of something to say in that moment.
Yeah, that's right.
That's your only postponement, you know?
Yeah.
Start reciting Shakespeare or something. I don't know.
Maybe it's better for you not knowing what you're going to say, so you can be like, okay, give me a second, you know? Do you think he did it like an improv crew? He goes down and he goes, okay, someone give me a prompt. Give me a name, a place.
I don't think the crowd was in the mood for that.
What? They're doing a lynching. Of course they're in the mood for that. You know, lynchings were like the fun thing to do back in the day.
He could have tried to claim that it wasn't him, it was a different Santa Claus. Because,
that's right.
You know, ultimately, I think really the only thing they had specifically identifying him was when the 4th grade girl had seen him lift up his mask and recognized him. She actually testified in court that it was him.
Oh.
Other than that, they didn't have a lot of things to tie him to the crime. So he could have been like, that was a different Santa Claus.
Your Honor, it was the real Santa Claus. Do you think he makes all his toys? No, he's indebted. He needs some money.
That's so true. Well, what do you think, Luis? Was this a good scheme or was this a stupid scheme, or both?
You know, I think it was important. It was good. I think it should have been better planned. I think people tend to not realize that these kinds of things take planning. Did you all not watch Ocean's 11?
Exactly. They always have the planning montage.
Yeah, you can't just do a heist. Or actually, they may argue, we did have a plan. Here's the Santa Claus costume. okay. And, I feel like they saw the Santa Claus costume, said, this is freaking genius. We're not going to do anything else.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. One thing I will say to their credit, I don't know if Ocean's 11 had come out in 1927, so maybe they were just like a little before their time. But yeah, I think about that a lot of like, how did they come up with the brilliant plan of let's dress up as Santa Claus so like no one will think it's out of place until we're robbing the bank. And then on the flip side of it, they're like, oops, we left the bag of money in Woodrow Wilson's car.
Goddamn, freaking Woodrow Wilson ruining things again. First it was the League of Nations. Now it's this bank robbery. Ridiculous.
It's always Woodrow Wilson, man.
Always Woodrow Wilson.
That's, Texas, they thought, let's put this $5,000 bounty out here. What we need to stop these bank robberies, a citizen militia, all hands on deck, end to end of the state, everyone standing guard. No, you just need Woodrow Wilson. You just need the crafty and wily Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah. No, get him out of here. Get him out of here. The U.S. was built on people doing stupid stuff, right? And I feel like anytime we try to diminish that or limit their strength is when the U.S. falls as a country. So let people do dumb stuff, maybe even if it's a dumb bank robbery.
Are you, I can't tell if that's you in favor of dress up as Santa Claus and rob a bank, or you in favor of put a blank $5,000 bounty on any dead bank robber you can come up with? Or is it both?
Let's just say I'm always in favor of a costume. Everything else, I don't know. Say what you will.
Yeah, that tracks. That really tracks. So, Luis, really some bittersweet stories we have today, because we're both of them. We're having fun. We're dropping our work to go explore caves, and we're dressing up as Santa Claus to rob banks. But then also, like, we did have a bunch of rabies and a little massacre, and then also like a bunch of people died in the bank robbery attempt. So, a lot of ups and downs here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, what is your main feel of these stories? Does this feel like it's more, just list of historical shenanigans, or is this like, are you feeling the drama here?
I think you played down the drama, Kurt. I think we tend to do that. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe I didn't give it the weight it probably deserved. Because first thing I hear when they're robbing a bank and getting shot at is, does the bag have a dollar sign? Right? So maybe I'm undermining just the drama of all of this.
It's extremely unfortunate how funny it is to picture Santa Claus using a 4th grade girl as cover to shoot at the police.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if that makes me a bad person,
so be it.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I can't not find that humorous.
And listen, like, I understand rabies sucks, right? Like, I think growing up, I had a bit of fear of rabies. But it's like one of those diseases where if you say you have it, that's just funny, Oh, she died of rabies, womp wah. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know.
It is unfortunately a little bit funny.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there are some diseases, like, okay, if you've got cancer, oh yeah, I'm sad, of course, duh. Rabies, though? Kind of funny.
That's the hill we're willing to die on. Rabies, actually funny. I'm not with you on this. I'm still terrified of rabies. I can't hear anything about rabies without being terrified, because it's just too easy for me to picture myself being the idiot who wandered into a cave and got bit by a bat.
Well, maybe don't go into a cave. You ever thought about that?
Maybe because I don't think it's funny, I'll avoid those situations, but you'll wander right in and get chomped by a bat. That would be like a fitting end. You laugh at all these rabies victims, and then
you die of
you're
rabies.
one as well. Then you get chomped on by a bat.
Maybe. I'm gonna make a T-shirt that just says rabies. Pretty funny. And that's going to be official podcast merch.
Do we need to stop the podcast for that? I can't tell. That one's on the right on the board.
That's on the house.
I don't know if that's a cancelable offense or not, but either way, let's keep it moving.
Yeah, I think we can move on from this moment.
Before we become the pro rabies podcast.
Yeah, no, I'll let you speak. In this podcast, I've been pro cannibalism. At some point, maybe even pro eugenics, and now I'm pro rabies. What's going on? I think I'm just pro. I just really like supporting things.
Just like supporting things.
I just love supporting. And if it's rabies, then so be it. I'll be its biggest fan. If rabies has no fans, I'm dead.
If the way that you have to get the spotlight is by making everyone angry at you, then so be it. That's just a price you have to pay.
Baby,
okay?
Controversy is the first step to fame.
Well, all that being said, let us move on to our least favorite part of this podcast, because once again, one of these stories is true and one is false, and we're going to find out which is which right here in our phase of
Deliberation.
So, Luis, just to give you a quick reminder of the stories I told you about the story that kind of jumped around a lot in time because we had our French bird scientists who got some rabies, and then our nomadic tribes who maybe got some rabies, and then our descendants of nomadic tribes who maybe had some rabies immunity. We were all over the place.
They just got just a touch of rabies, just a dash, sprinkle of rabies.
Just a dash of rabies makes the medicine go down. And then on the other side, we had the story about our theatrical bank robbery. We got one Santa Claus and 3 regular bank robbers on a car chase all over Texas, through an oil field, and finally dying, being hung by a mob. What do you think about all that?
Well, Kurt, I hate to be this guy, but I think I've already made up my mind.
Oh, wow. Confident today.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it.
I will deliberate, but know that I'm doing it to explain why my mind is made up already.
Okay, let's hear it.
Rabies story, okay? I feel like you used a tactic that I tend to use all the time, which is the powerful tactic of distract him with facts and context. AKA, you've got a story about rabies, you want to talk about rabies, and then you're like, okay, Parthians, here we go. You know, that's my thought. I feel like you made the story about rabies, and then you're like, okay, hold on. Parthians, though, you consider that. It's the well-known strategy of bringing in someone that's not who you expect.
The old switcheroo.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking that that's a false story, because the other story is just too perfect. And say whatever you want about the U.S. Early 1900s, like we've said before, it's prime time for shenanigans and tomfoolery. And I feel like this is a time period where precisely Bugs Bunny and all these different cartoons got their inspiration from, you know? So I really believe the second story, you've told it precisely right. I like all the details about what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. Of course, I see a dude dressed up in a Santa costume going crazy. Like that just, it feels natural to me, but maybe it's because I'm very costume forward and I'm really enjoying this. But those are my thoughts. Also, quick little fun fact, Kurt. Actually, I'll tell you a fun fact after you share with me what the real story is. So I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, very mysterious. All right, so just to be clear, your final decision here is that our Santa Claus bank robbery is a true story?
Yes, that is what I'm saying.
Well, you know, I talked at the beginning of the episode about how we keep ending up talking about bank robberies, especially in similar time and location. And I think maybe I've just simply met my match with stories from this time period, because there's no story I can come up with so wild that you won't believe it, evidently. This is in fact true. There was a Santa Claus bank robbery. Texas had a $5,000 bounty on any dead bank robber you could turn up, and the lynch mob did in fact get Marshall Ratliff at the end.
Maybe it's because they're just such good stories, Kurt, that every single time they never disappoint, and they've always been true, the ones you've shared on this podcast. So
that's true. Maybe I need to come up with a fake bank robbery, but there's just too many real bank robberies to talk about. I'm like, we're already at capacity of bank robbery stories.
I'm drowning in bank robberies, damn it.
So now that we know this, Luis, what was your little fact you were going to give me?
Oh, it's just that my dad had been vaccinated against rabies. That's it.
Oh, okay. All right. Very, very cool.
My father, at some point in his childhood or young adult life, got bit by a street dog. And I don't mean like a gang member. I mean an actual dog. And he got bit by a street dog, and of course everyone was worried that rabies was a thing, so he would go into the doctor every week or every couple of days and get a needle stuck straight into his spine, and that used to be the vaccine for rabies if you got it. And you know, to this day he didn't get rabies. So something tells me that with my fascination with the Romans at the very least, and with the context of my father having rabies at some point, or narrowly avoiding rabies, I guess, I wasn't too ready to say that the story was real.
I see. You're just too knowledgeable about rabies.
Yeah, I'm pro rabies. I'm its
You're
biggest
big in the rabies industry.
Yeah, I'm the biggest advocate for rabies. Or it's, you know how they do these runs for cancer awareness or breast cancer awareness. I'm doing runs for rabies awareness. Just people to be aware of rabies.
You're running for
what are you running for? I'm running for rabies today.
But so they can have more rabies. We're spreading rabies.
Not necessarily, but I mean, it's like, hey, this is rabies. Have you thought about it lately?
So you're doing a marathon that's neutral on rabies? It's neither more people get rabies nor get vaccinated against rabies. Just like,
it's
hey,
just
do you know about this?
It's just awareness.
It's out there.
It's actually just awareness. Are you aware of rabies?
Just awareness.
It's just awareness. We're not raising money.
Unbiased awareness.
Yeah, it's just, hey, objectively, do you know rabies? Be afraid.
Oh, that's great. Well, Luis, let's talk a little bit about the stories then. So first, I just want to say about our rabies story here. This is basically entirely made up. There's the usual of like there was a Parthian Empire and places and regions, blah, blah, blah. But all the plot points in here did not happen. This was mostly inspired by a Radiolab podcast episode called Rodney versus Death. In this podcast episode, it's really interesting. They talk about the creation of this experimental procedure called the Milwaukee Protocol, which actually led to a few people surviving rabies. And they also spend a little bit of time talking about random people or communities of people who have some form of rabies antibodies in their blood, and that it's possible that there may be some humans who could survive rabies because of their genetics. But once again, there's not really an ethical way to test this. And in real life, there is kind of the same gray area of like, doesn't seem like you would necessarily survive rabies, but maybe it would help. People kind of disagree about it. But so that's really interesting that there is like a little shred of truth in there.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, with a name like the Milwaukee Protocol, I don't know if I'm going to be too interested in trying to get the rabies treatment. The Milwaukee Protocol, to me, just sounds like eating a whole lot of poutine and beer on a nice hot summer day.
Well, it is similar to what happens after you have a whole bunch of poutine and beer, because the Milwaukee Protocol is basically them putting you in a chemically induced coma indefinitely.
Oh.
So you're kind of on the right track.
Nice.
Chemically induced coma by beer and poutine.
Hey, you've got rabies? Eat. Beer, poutine, cures rabies. Have they ever thought about this? No, they've never asked.
All right. Well, I see you're not impressed by my Milwaukee Protocol facts, but that's all right because Luis, let's talk quickly about some extra interesting details about our true story here. So obviously everything in the Marshall Ratliff Santa Claus story is true, but what if I told you that right in the same place, in the same time, there was something even weirder going on, completely unrelated?
I don't know. The construction of the Panama Canal.
No, even weirder than that, if you can believe it, Luis.
Okay.
Will you venture with me once again into the wild, wild territory of turn-of-the-century Cisco, Texas?
Of course, I would go anywhere with you, Kurt, to the end of the world.
But especially there.
Yeah, right.
Especially turn-of-the-century Texas.
Of course.
So, in January 1928, Marshall Ratliff was standing trial in the Eastland County Courthouse for robbing a bank dressed as Santa Claus. We know this, right? But just remember, this is the Eastland County Courthouse, okay?
Okay.
And really quick, Luis, are you familiar with the story of Rip Van Winkle?
Of course I am, Kurt. Please.
You are well-versed in your folktales. That's true. Well, Rip Van Winkle, for anyone who doesn't know, is a short story that was published by Irving Washington in 1820. It became like a famous American short story, and it was the story of this farmer named Rip Van Winkle who wandered through the Catskill Mountains, met a group of dwarves, accepted a drink of liquor from them, and then fell asleep under a tree and took a 20-year nap. Speaking of chemically induced coma. Then when Rip wakes up, he discovers he's an old man and the world has drastically changed since he's been asleep.
I just want to say, I feel like I would so be caught up in a Rip Van Winkle scheme. Like if I'm walking through the forest and a couple of dwarves come up and start chatting with me, of course I'm going to make small talk with them.
There's a 0% chance you refuse the liquor from them. You're definitely taking the liquor.
Of course I'm taking the liquor, and of course I'm taking a big nap. Are you kidding me? I've been real tired lately.
So now we have a little bit of context here. Okay, let me tell you about this. In 1897, this is 6 years before Marshall Ratliff was born, a new courthouse was being constructed in Eastland, Texas. And the cornerstone of the foundation of this new courthouse had a large alcove in it, so the town decided to make a time capsule inside the cornerstone and then build the courthouse on top of it. Now, in this time capsule, among other things, they put a Bible, a bottle of liquor, and a horned lizard named Blinky that the county clerk's 4-year-old son had caught earlier that day.
Oh?
Now, you might be wondering, Luis, why would they put a horned lizard named Blinky in the time capsule? So, horned lizards, also sometimes called horned toads, are cold-blooded, so during the day they sunbathe for warmth, and from October to March they bury themselves in the ground and hibernate. Now, apparently there's a Native American legend that a horned lizard can hibernate for as long as 100 years.
My God.
So the townspeople of Eastland decided this might be a good way to test this. And if this were true, this would be pretty impressive because the average lifespan of a horned lizard is only 5 to 7 years.
It can only live 5 to 7 years, but it can hibernate up to 100.
Yeah. So they put Blinky in the time capsule and build the courthouse on top of it. Then 31 years later, in January 1928, Marshall Ratliff stands trial for his Santa Claus bank robbery. And then the month after that, the courthouse was torn down to make way for a new one. Now, after the courthouse had been torn down, the time capsule was opened in front of a crowd of nearly 1,000 people. And inside the time capsule, amazingly, Blinky woke up and was still alive.
What?
Because of this 31-year nap, Blinky was renamed Ol' Rip after Rip Van Winkle.
No.
And lots of people were understandably skeptical that this could be possible, that Ol' Rip could have survived so long without water, sunlight, or oxygen.
What?
But most people did eventually accept that this was the same lizard.
Wow.
So Ol' Rip became famous throughout Texas and eventually throughout the country. Sorry, you have thoughts?
No, I'm speechless, Kurt. This is nuts. Blinky. Go Blinky.
I told you, even weirder than Santa Claus bank robbery.
Yeah.
So Ol' Rip became famous throughout Texas because of this, and eventually was famous throughout the whole country. In May 1928, Ol' Rip was taken on a nationwide tour, and this included being presented to President Calvin Coolidge in Washington.
Nice.
On Ol' Rip's Wikipedia page, there's a picture of a very stoic-looking Calvin Coolidge with the caption, quote, "Calvin Coolidge inspected Ol' Rip at the White House. He declined to touch Ol' Rip, but he stroked the lizard with his spectacles."
Hey.
I just think that is really funny. That is so funny.
Oh, man. Incredible. I need to look up this picture.
Oh, yeah. In 1928, the Democratic National Convention happened in Houston, Texas. So, of course, horned lizards were sold as souvenirs at the convention for $2.50 each. This would be about $45 today. And they sold so many horned lizards that the total population in West Texas significantly declined. Because horned lizards eat insects and pests to destroy crops, the Texas Department of Agriculture warned that if the exporting didn't stop so the population could recover, thousands of dollars worth of crops would be lost throughout the state.
Jesus.
So they were so into this whole horned lizard souvenir thing that they almost decimated their agriculture field a little bit.
Wow.
Ol' Rip died of pneumonia in January 1929.
Died of pneumonia? Come on.
All the good ones die of pneumonia. What am I always saying?
That's right.
It's always pneumonia and tuberculosis.
Always.
Now, later that same year, Marshall Ratliff was executed by a mob. However, unlike Marshall, Ol' Rip had died a hero, so he was put to rest in a tiny satin-lined coffin and put on display in the new Eastland Courthouse. That's where he rested until 1961, when for some reason Ol' Rip's body was stolen from the courthouse, Luis.
No.
And a ransom note was left demanding $10,000 for his return.
No, Old Rip.
Somehow, after a citywide search, Ol' Rip was found. But then 1962, the following year, candidate for governor of Texas named John Connally visited the Eastland County Courthouse and Ol' Rip as a publicity event. And for some reason, he thought it would be a good idea to pick up Ol' Rip by one of his legs, and the leg broke off from the body. So now there's just a horned lizard body in a casket with 3 legs. 10 years later, in 1972, Ol' Rip's body was stolen again.
Oh, come on. What do they want with him?
And even weirder, somehow the city found the body again. But this time, a conspiracy starts among residents that it's not the original Ol' Rip. And this even led to an anonymous letter being sent to newspapers claiming the new Ol' Rip is a fake and offering $5,000 to anyone who can prove otherwise. And this may seem kind of crazy, Luis, but to be fair, you may remember Ol' Rip's leg was broken off by politician John Connally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when Rip was returned the second time, he inexplicably had all 4 legs again.
What? Hold on. Justice for Old Rip.
And that's the end of the story here. That's the last word on Ol' Rip is
really
is that maybe they went and got a fake horned lizard to put in the courthouse.
Oh, come on.
At the most indecipherable and confusing moment, fittingly, that is where this story ends. This is the story of Santa Claus bank robberies and 4-year-old boys catching horned lizards named Blinky and hopeful politicians damaging lizard corpses and right there with a massive conspiracy running rampant, upsetting people throughout Eastland, Texas. That actually seems pretty plausible. That's where we end this chapter.
To this day, can we still visit Old Rip?
You know, I think that Ol' Rip is still in the courthouse. I could be wrong about that. Somebody look that up, please. But as far as I know, Ol' Rip, maybe not the original one, but he's there.
We've got to make a road trip.
So what do you think, Luis? Does that somehow give you new perspective to the Santa Claus bank robbery story that literally right underneath the feet of Marshall Ratliff is Blinky, a.k.a. Ol' Rip, napping, ready to become nationwide famous and meet Calvin Coolidge?
It gives me a different perspective on life, Kurt. Like, I think like that story rewired my brain, and it taught me that we always need to appreciate what we have in front of us. You know, and it made me realize that maybe Ol' Rip was the friends we made along the way. It left me good. Left me very good, Kurt. I can go home easily. Plus, I won, so I feel good.
That's true. You did win, and that's some points for you, making our score 8 for you and 5 for me. Ugh. But, my takeaway from all this is seriously, like, on a wholesome note, just like the richness of life. That there can be this story that I'm researching about a Santa Claus bank robbery, and then I just accidentally stumble onto like same exact place, same time. There's more weird stuff going on. It's just like, life is wild. Look into this stuff. You'll be satisfied. There's always fun stuff going on. You just got to find it.
You just gotta start digging. Maybe you'll find a hibernating horn toad.
This brings us full circle, because this is like the duality of the curious cat is, some days you might get bit on the head by a bat and die. Other days you discover that the people of Texas had a horned toad hibernating below their courthouse for 31 years.
You never know.
And that's kind of what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get.
That's true. And so I hope everyone enjoyed learning these absolutely indecipherable stories and a little bit of equally indecipherable lies. I sure had a lot of fun telling them, and I think Luis had a lot of fun learning about disguised bank robberies and horned lizards.
I had a great time, Kurt. Thank you. I liked it. And I liked the bonus ending. The secret ending, the good ending.
That's true. The old rip ending.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed it at home, please do us a favor. Tell your friends and family about it. Tell somebody. Just grab a random person on the street and start playing this podcast. People need to know about old rip, okay? What can I say? If you want to see pictures from the episodes or more content from our episodes, please check out our social medias. We're on Instagram at UnbelievablePod and Twitter at UnbelievablePC. Everybody have a great time, and remember, life is pretty weird, okay? Just go rob a bank. See what happens. Bye, y'all.
See ya.